We've got the amazing Matt, Forbes 30 under 30, National Geographic photographer, and overall pretty solid dude.
Thank you.
So without further ado.
Thanks so much, Andres. Good evening, everyone. Just a fair warning, I am not a prompt engineer. I've never studied any of this by trade. In fact, my experience comes as somebody with disabilities for the past 3 decades. I am deaf on my right, blind on my left, and ADHD. So for the longest time, I've wondered, how can I start using technology? And in grade school, I finally had access in the late 90s to a typing machine, and it really got me ahead. And by the time we got to the reality of what AI is, I started having this realization on the right, which is generic responses, and getting frustrated at the outputs and realizing I really wanted this to be better than it was, and all with the promise of it being effortless and getting these perfect outputs every time. So I recently realized there's this AI gap. I was reading this State of Customer Conversations 2024 report, and like 90% of businesses said that they just love AI. You can look at stuff like Salesforce and any other major company, and they're using AI. But the fact is, only about 50% of consumers feel that way. So it makes me wonder, why does this gap here? And, like, raise your hand. Do you feel pretty positive about AI? Like, it's got a pretty good feeling if you know it can do what you want it to do. But keep your hand up if you feel confident with AI, because that's been the big challenge for me, is getting to that point that I'm not second guessing those outputs. I feel like I can move forward with the answers it gives me because, like Steve and Jay were saying, it's based on the patterns that are in our own data that we bring to that table. So the difference between AI disappointment and AI delight isn't necessarily the tool, it's the approach that you take. And part one of this whole idea is going to be wrapping our head around this whole AI mindset. So first and foremost, AI is not magic. Now, a couple years ago when I played with Midjourney for some generative images like the one you see here, it feels a lot like magic. But the fact is, like they said, garbage in, garbage out. If you give it a prompt or an instruction that you hope is going to get you across that canyon, it's probably going to get you halfway there on a rickety bridge. The second point is it's a conversation partner. So if you think about this like playing tennis with AI or playing chess, it's definitely not a unidirectional conversation. It's something that you want to have a back and forth with. Stop treating AI like a vending machine. It's the worst thing you can do. Walk up and hit A1 and hope you get the result that you're looking for, and start treating it like a collaborative process. It's like you're playing chess, like Jay was saying, and as you get more data to the other side of it, as you teach it more of your patterns, your problems, and your goals, you're going to start seeing that it's going to get you closer to where you want to go. But again, this is never a one-and-done solution. So where most people get stuck, this is kind of how I felt. What should I tell this machine? How do I get from that one side of the bridge to the other, like Indiana Jones grabbing his hat at the last minute? And 3 fatal flaws I keep running into are this idea of information overload. There's just so much data. If you have one video call with somebody, I find it's typically a 50-page transcript. And just like saying, hey, I'll send you the transcript is easier said than done when you end up having to sift through it all after. And the second thing is vague instructions. So assuming the AI understands your intent, because it only knows what you give it aside from the base data that it's already built on. And then the third is abandonment after first try. So this was me early on a few years ago, trying to get these systems to go where I wanted them to go. But if you give up on the first try, you're never going to get to the other side and get that data to the point that it feels like where you want to be. Let's go through the second part, the mental shift. And this is the idea of going from output fixation to mastering the process of that tennis game with the AI. AI excellence isn't about writing the perfect prompt. It's about guiding an evolving conversation. I kind of think of it like skipping a stone across the water, and every time that stone hits the water, it turns into a different chess piece. And if you do it right, you're going to hit checkmate and get to your solution. So if we think about this acronym PACE, we've got purpose, architecture, conversation, and evaluation. And we're going to get into each one of these, but basically purpose is defining what does success look like for you. If you've ever worked with a business coach, life coach, therapist, they're like, what does it mean to be happy? And there really is no one answer for that. And the same kind of goes with AI. Where is that bridge being built to help you get to and not everybody under the sun? The second is architecture. How do you build the right prompt structure? And again, no formal background in this, but I've been told by my friends, Matt, however you're doing this, it works a lot better than what I've read in the textbooks for whatever reason. I think you can overthink the process and overbake the cake, so to speak. The third is conversation. How do you guide that interactive flow? And the fourth is evaluation. How do you assess and refine outputs, both as a human, and then like Jay was saying, how do you get that system to refine and align its own outputs? So let's start with the P in PACE, purpose, defining success. If we think, how do we begin with the end in mind? So knowing where we want to build that bridge is half the battles. Whether you're working with resume and cover letter data, using that refinement process to get that resume tailored just so the robots pick up on the keywords, and making sure that my voice to text, I think out loud easier than I write. If I can use that process and kind of refine the fluff, knowing that the other side of that maze, hopefully getting an interview, then beginning with the end in mind is going to help you kind of set your target. And speaking of which, setting your target and being precise at the beginning, it's going to eliminate probably around 80% of those problems that people face. Folks will send me an email, leave a YouTube comment, they'll be like, I just can't get it to do what I want it to do. And half the reason is they're just being really vague and scratching the surface on that first ask. So tactical template. I found that talking about the action, and then the subject, the parameters, and then your success criteria, kind of a plus B plus C plus D equals starting to get where you want the convo to go. But again, this isn't a one and done. You don't want to give it a novel, and that's where we get into architecture, the A in PACE. So this is building an effective prompt and skipping that chess piece across the water. So why conversation beats complexity is because we can sequentially iterate and improve our satisfaction over time. If we get to step 1A and we say, no, you're getting too much in the weeds, we need it to be plain language, we need it to be 8th grade reading level, we want the general public to understand what is insert complex topic. You'll find that ratings over these single complex prompts, like a comparison, if you give it a paragraph, it may not do as well, versus if you give it sentence by sentence. The next is another acronym, CALM. This stands for context, assignment, limitations, and methodology. So context is giving it relevant background data. So I mentioned the resume and cover letter example, giving it that skill set and that pattern of sea of data. It could be a CV. I've got an 11-page CV, have 15 versions of a resume from different things I've been applying to, and it found the patterns throughout those different pieces and started to piece together the puzzle. A is for assignment, giving it specific expertise to think through. So if you give, for example, ChatGPT, you could give it a picture, I'm a photographer, and you could say, what's wrong with this picture subjectively? And it's going to use things like exposure or graininess, or if it's in focus and sharp, or if it's blurry and kind of smeared. And it'll give you a really broad scope of an output back. But if you say, act as a photography professor and give me a relevant critique for a wildlife photographer, then it's going to say a lot more specific things like, the frog is in focus, but the fly that it's eating is blurry and out of the frame. So an example of this would be analyze this content as a specific expert and focus on this aspect. So if I go back one again, limitations. So saying, I don't want you to give me a textbook. I just want you to be as concise as possible. Here are the walls that we're going to put up around this experiment. And then methodology. If you say, I'd like to know about the lighting first, and then the focus, and then what's working overall with the scene, why does this problem work, or how does it need to be solved? So CALM, this is just a loose framework I like to think through when I'm building prompts over time. This is the core subset I think through in the process of doing that. So format specifications. A lot of people tell me, Matt, I never get the formatting I want when I put something in and just get a string of raw text out. It might look like there should be things in it to segment that data better, and that's where we start to tell it. Can you format this with headers and sections and tables? Can you polish it using Markdown language? And that's with the hashtag symbol or the pound symbol. 2 of those pound symbols is an H2 header. 1 is an H1. So if it starts using these polished frameworks, I've actually got a white paper prompt that I use to push every 50-page call transcript through. And now I get a 2-page summary report that has an overview, subsections for each of the major topics, and then key next steps and questions to bring up for new business. Asking to convert it to plain language is going to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We never get too much of that jargon, and if we do, it's defined. It'll say, hey, when someone says prompt, what they mean is this, and for that white paper prompt I use, I have an appendix part at the end, so it'll always put kind of a little glossary of the terms that may get some people stumped. And then the last segment with dividers, tables, lists. So dividers could be a dividing line. It could be having different types of tables for different types of things. I've got a table prompt that's like, make the top 10 tables from this 50-page call transcript. And it'll do everything from anything I didn't think of, challenges and potential solutions, old business, new business, things that we brought up that were fun, key quotes and other technology that's mentioned. I mean, it's things that are kind of latent in the back of our logic and language that we don't always bring up to the surface. So a lot like my macro photography, it's this conversation with those deeper patterns. We have stuff under our nose all the time right now, but we don't look at it through the right lens of logic most of the time because it's back to that information overload. So if we go to the C in PACE, we've got conversation, guiding that flow. First responses are wonderful starting points, but they're never finish lines. And most of the people I've talked to or coached around AI or business and brand strategy, they look at that initial red pen and they're like, yeah, it just didn't give me what I want. And I'm like, well, what did you want? And they say what they were hoping to achieve. And I say, well, did you tell the system that? And they say, well, no, I just figured it would know. So it's a great example of quality comes from dialogue, not from those initial prompts. If we look at the acronym RARE, we've got request, assess, refine, and expand. So when you request having it look through all that data and give you something, you have to assess it piece by piece. It's skipping that chess piece across the water. Is it supposed to be a bishop when it hits the water next, or does it need to be a knight? And there's probably a reason why. Then you want to refine it. If it's not heading where you want it to go, you have to say, we're on the wrong track. This is where we need to go. So I need that speaker bio to be in plain language. You use too much AI jargon. Or I need to get the point across to what these listeners are going to learn and not just go on about how cool Matt is. And then from there you expand. Once you get it back on track, it's like sticking the model train back on the tracks. Then you can tell it, let's continue on. Otherwise, all the cars behind that front train are just going to fall off the tracks. So effective feedback techniques for me mean guiding that AI to improvement. So at the bottom it says, I like specific element. Please adjust specific aspect by specific direction. So this is an example of getting that train back on the tracks using a specific guidance and describing why you like that part that's working. So it's like the idea, what's working, what isn't, and how do we adapt from there and grow. And then the refinement sequence is define, align, and refine. So you define those parameters, you give it the walls, you tell it the goal, you refine it as you skip that chess piece across the water, and then you refine that as needed. It doesn't always have to be refined, but most of the people out there doing these zero shot or one shot, it's like taking a boulder and chucking it in the lake once and hoping it'll skip. So then we get to the E in PACE, and that's evaluation, ensuring quality and safety. The three verification dimensions are accuracy, relevance, and ethics. Is what it's giving you accurate? Are you cross-checking and fact-checking each piece that it puts out, or are you just kind of assuming that it's telling you the truth? And this tool's like Lenny AI. My mom's a nurse, and you tell it, well, my patient's having these challenges, and Lenny says it could be a diagnosis of A, B, or C. You could just miss one little piece of that or read it the wrong way, and even though it's fine-tuned on that process, you have to fact check each piece that comes out. Relevance is it relevant to the conversation? If it tells me how to get a great sports photo and I'm asking it, how do I improve this macro flower picture, it's not going to do me much good as far as learning and self-improving as the human side of all this. And then the ethics, like somebody else had mentioned, how do you make chlorine gas? How do you make an atomic bomb? I mean, we don't want to ask stuff like this, or even social engineering, like how can I convince these people to do what I want them to do versus what might be ethically neutral or best for the colony as a whole, so to speak. So AI confidence does not equal AI correctness. Again, it can sound really confident coming out of these systems, and you can think right on the spot, that's got to be true. It just sounds so academic, feels research-cited. These are things that are red flags, but when you're wearing rose-colored glasses, red flags are really hard to see. So, reminders, these prompts are starting points. You should always customize different prompts and things that you're building to get that bridge to where you want to go. And always verify critical information through ideally multiple sources. And that's part of why I love tools like Perplexity. So if you check out my YouTube at the QR at the end, you'll notice that I did a video on Perplexity. And what I love about it is it's always got citations sprinkled throughout the whole response it gives you. And you can also use models like DeepSeek, the one that Jay mentioned, and that's like taking the chess piece and skipping it 100 times because it's thinking really deep, but the fact that Perplexity is hosting that brain, it isn't being spread all over the world, so to speak, or your data is not being stored in certain servers. So recap on PACE: purpose, architecture, conversation, and evaluation. Now I'm going to do some quick clicks. This is a downloadable. The idea of how do we start building out different prompts for different things. Essential safety guidelines. You want to keep in mind, never share personal information. Don't share your financials. Don't tell it your blood type. I mean, we're just asking for Terminator to show up on our door when we do that, but more so, we're more worried about the humans behind what's happening. I've heard a lot about different scams that are AI powered now, from voice calling to email hacking. It can look down to the T for the website you visit or the wording or who sends it to you, and it could be AI powered. So keep your wits about you. Ideally, you'd copy the prompt details, replace the bracketed data with your own, paste it into your model of choice or platform. For me, it's Perplexity, and then use those follow-up prompts to refine your results. Some different prompt examples. Market research. Analyze the industry type market in location X, focusing on ABC. So the example I did in the video was analyze the fine art photography market in northern Colorado. We want to focus on galleries, exhibitions, and other opportunities for my wildlife art. Second was competitive analysis. The example prompt template is create a comparison table. So notice we're using table, we're using comparison. Create a comparison table of the top business type in location, including service offerings, price points, unique selling propositions. You can give it those defining parameters. And in the example I gave, I said create a comparison table of photography galleries in Estes Park, and I'd like art commission structures and exhibition frequency and how much artist support it gets. Is it worth my time to even crack into that call for entries for, small businesses or artists or whatever your speciality is? Strategic planning, it's been fantastic. Like I said, 50 pages a call. I've got oodles of different video call files, and now I can give it to a RAG, a RAG model, retrieval augmented generation. It's going to find all those little chunks and it'll say, well, in this call you talked about these key concepts. In these 4 calls you talked about these. You should do a program presentation on this for that upcoming conference. And by the way, these are the conferences you should do in ranked order. You can see how when you start to build it up, you can get a 6-month plan for a business goal. Like, I want to speak at other conferences this year. Here are the calls I've been having. What conferences should I consider? Which are worth my time? Which cost money? And then we follow this up with what I call pattern prompts. It's like skipping that stone a few more times. You get part of the way there and you say, for the previous topic, let's do an analysis. Let's look at historic trends, or let's look at future projections, applications for the sake of collecting applications. And then it picks one artist. That's just a money grab. For validation, can we validate these findings with historic data, industry reports, different sources? How can we make sure we know what we're reading is the ground truth or the ground source? And for iterative improvement, this is one of my favorite prompts. It's score this output from 1 to 100. Consider what would make it a stronger output with the data that we have on hand. Suggest a specific table with updates, and then execute on those updates to make the refined result. And please don't use code boxes, because a lot of times it defaults to code boxes, and then the data is just not as easy for humans to read, but it may be easier for systems to read. And here we go again with refined formatting. Maybe we want some headers, maybe we want tables and lists and sections and subsections. And again, don't use code boxes. Little stuff like that is going to really refine the outcome of what it gives you and help you be able to read it easier and navigate it better as a human. Quick troubleshooting: if your results are too broad, give it more specific parameters, build those walls a little higher, give it some location constraints, maybe specific time periods, and specify target markets or target goals. When your results are too narrow, you should remove some limiting factors. Maybe instead of only wildlife photography galleries, you could say fine art galleries in the northern Colorado region instead of wildlife photography galleries in Estes Park. And expand that geographic scope like I just demonstrated. Broaden your time range. Just say, all musicians throughout history instead of saying musicians in the past 20 years. And then include related markets. Like maybe that music market talks to the art market in a different way and we never saw it, but it was sitting right in the data. Some different tips: start broad, then narrow in. Think of it like a funnel and filtering your focus over time. Always request data sources when possible. Use your follow-up questions to your advantage and refine and align the results. And save successful prompts for future use. That's how I'm sharing them with you today. I've iterated on these over time. Occasionally I'll ask a system, what do you think about this prompt? But honestly, it kind of goes off the rails and either makes it really fluffy afterwards, or it takes out some of those key things like, please don't use code boxes. And always verify critical information. Fact-checking is really important. As somebody with a photojournalism and science background, I can't stress enough that fact-checking is the cement that builds this bridge and solidifies it. Couple quick advanced strategies: data analysis. You can say, let's create a framework for analyzing this set of data every month, or maybe you have to do quarterly analysis for your business. It can be based on certain tools. It can be based on certain reporting. And market positioning. If you have current market gaps or current weaknesses for yourself or your competitors, learning what those are through all this pattern data is going to help you become a better person in business. It's going to help you get more involved with your market. Maybe they're like, oh, nobody's ever talked about that before, but maybe none of us noticed. It also helps detect emerging trends and customer pain points. So thank you all. I hope this has been a nice mind map for getting you started in the world of prompting. If you'd like, you can scan this code or go to Cicanese.org, and I've got that guide that you just saw, and I'll be sure to add the whole presentation if that's useful. And thanks so much to Andres and everybody coming out. It's great to be here.
Thanks is all to Matt. Amazing speakers that we've been having tonight. I deeply appreciate all the time. Let's have a 10-minute intermission. We'll pick it up at 7:45 and then have a Q&A panel from there. Sounds good?